Hi, welcome to Introduction to Biochemistry, a fascinating field of science that combines both biology and chemistry. For example, this molecule DNA right here is an example of biochemistry. This example right here is the structure of a protein, which is also a crucial part of biochemistry. And in this presentation, we'll delve into what biochemistry is and its importance and some basics of life. So what is biochemistry? Biochemistry is the study of chemical processes and substances inherent in a living organism. It explores the molecules, the reactions, and pathways that occur at the cellular and molecular level to understand how living things function. As mentioned before, biochemistry is an overlapping part between chemistry and biology. It explores the inherent living processes through chemical means to understand biological phenomena. Now, why is biochemistry so important? Biochemistry is important because it is crucial to drug development, disease prevention, immune defense mechanisms, and enhancing crop production. For example, doxorubicin, for example, a form of chemotherapy. It's all based on biochemistry. It explores how cancer receptors are responsible for the proliferation of cancer cells and how drugs can bind to those receptors and modify that cancer cell and have a potential of mitigating it. Biochemistry is also responsible for understanding immune defense mechanisms. For example, antibodies and antigens are all part of the big branch of biochemistry. Furthermore, biochemistry is also used to enhance crop production. Knowing the molecules and the processes of plants can help enhance crop production or make crops more robust. For example, a particular strain of bacteria can help corn become resistant to pesticides or pests, and it can provide more robust food. This can ensure more food to go around the entire world and potentially end starvation. Now, we need to understand the organization of life. Because as all biology, we need to understand the organization of life and figure out which parts are is biochemistry concerned with. So now we start with the most basic organization of life, and that is the atom. The atom is defined as the smallest unit of matter that retains the properties of an element. And an element is a substance that is made up of only one type of atom. For example, gold. Gold is only made up of one atom, and that is called the gold atom. And many atoms make up the element gold. The gold is known as the element. Carbon is also an atom. You see a lump of carbon, and it only contains one type of atom, and that is the carbon atom. Now, as we move on, when two atoms join together, we have a molecule. Oxygen gas, the very gas that you and I are breathing right now, is also called a molecule. These are joined together by covalent bonds. As we move on, we move to the organelle. Organelles are the organs of cells. They are the parts of the cell that are responsible for different functions. The mitochondria, for example, is the energy powerhouse of a cell. The Golgi apparatus is responsible for packaging and modifying proteins. The next level is the cell, the most basic unit of life. These three parts, as mentioned before, although they are less than the organization of the cell, they are not living. A mitochondria, or for example, the Golgi apparatus isolated from the cell cannot live on its own. An atom is not living, and a molecule is not living at all. Now, when cells come together, they become a tissue. And tissues are responsible for organs, which is the next level. There are four types of tissue: nervous tissue, connective tissue, epithelial tissue, and muscle tissue. When tissues come together, they make up organs, which work together to perform a group of tissues working together to perform a function. For example, the stomach, your brain, they are all made up of different tissues. Next, when different groups of organs come together, different organs come together, they make up an organ system. they perform a certain function. Your digestive system, for example, is made up of different organs such as the large intestine, the small intestine, the stomach, the liver, and also the pancreas. They have a certain function, which is to digest your food and to extract out the nutrients and to excrete the waste. Next, as different organ systems come together, they make up the organism, which is us, like humans, lions, or zebras. They're all organisms made up of organ systems that work together to perform different life functions. Now, as organisms of the same species that live in the same area, we call that a population. You can have a group of lions that live in the same area, and we call that the population of lions. Now, let's add in different populations. When different populations come together in a specific area, we call that a community. Zebras on the African savanna and also lions on an African savanna, as well as the gazelle, are when they come together, we call that a community. Now, as communities of organisms interact with one another and their environment, including the non-living things like rivers, rocks, we call that the ecosystem, which is a specific part of a biome where organisms and non-living things interact. And this is when we progress to the highest level, which is the biosphere, is the parts of the earth where life exists. Now, we need to know the characteristics of life. There is no single thing that defines life. Rather, scientists have come up with different characteristics that define life. For example, the first thing is that living things respond to external stimuli. For example, if you are hot, you sweat because water evaporates, taking your heat away with it. And when you're cold, you shiver because it generates heat. And this plant, for example, when it tends to grow towards the sunlight, these are all examples of responding to external stimuli. All of us organisms, and when we see an external stimuli, we will respond to it. The other characteristic of life is order. Living things are made up of one or more cells. They can be unicellular or multicellular. The paramecium, for example, is a unicellular organism. It's only made up of one cell. This jaguar here, for example, is a multicellular organism, meaning it's made up of one or more cells and there are different types. Nevertheless, they are all made up of cells, which is the characteristic of life. Another characteristic of life is metabolism, which is how we change food into energy, specifically ATP. Organisms that do this, animals and plants also do it. It's called cellular respiration, where we take chemical energy, fats, carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and we turn that into the body's energy currency called ATP. This generates byproducts such as carbon dioxide and water and heat. We can use that energy to perform different processes such as cell division and also to maintain our structure. Another characteristic of life is homeostasis, which is the regulation of the body's balance. Fluid levels, body temperature, and blood sugar are all need to be kept at a specific spot in order for the organism to live. This is called homeostasis, or the balance of an organism. All living things want to maintain a perfect balance. Blood sugar cannot be too high and it cannot be too low. Body temperature must be at around 37 degrees Celsius, and fluid levels must be kept at the right level. The other really defining characteristic of life is DNA, RNA, or heredity. In order for things to be considered living, they must contain RNA or DNA. Most organisms contain DNA. Bacteria and viruses, they contain RNA. DNA is made up of different sugars and phosphate backbone. The other characteristic of life is reproduction. Living things can reproduce sexually or asexually. Sexual reproduction requires two parents. The sperm cell here is from one parent, which contains 23 chromosomes in humans. The egg cell is also from the other parent, and when they fuse together, they make the offspring, which contains double the amount of chromosomes of each haploid cell, or sperm and the egg. Asexual reproduction, on the other hand, only requires one parent. For example, as you can see here, this is known as binary fission, or how bacteria reproduce. It starts with one parent and it divides into two daughter cells. Our cells also undergo asexual reproduction. Our somatic cells or body cells, such as skin cells, muscle cells, they divide asexually through a process called mitosis, and it does not require a second parent. Finally, living things grow. They grow from little to tall. As you can see from this plant here, it starts out as just a tiny piece of a plant and it gradually progresses into a larger plant. And ultimately, as time goes on, it can progress into a tree. All living things grow, including unicellular organisms. They take energy from the environment and they grow. They can grow bigger and they can also divide when it gets to that point. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.